this part of the tutorials on JavaScript, we want to talk about JSON. So you must be familiar with JSON if you have worked with some other different languages like Python. But JSON is originally originated from JavaScript. So it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So if you have followed along with this tutorial on JavaScript, you must know what an object is and how do we define it. So here is the kind of notation for objects that is stringified, so meaning that all of the objects, the names, the keys and the values are all in a string, and then you will parse them in JavaScript and will use them as an object. So JSON itself is language independent, meaning that you can use it in any other languages, and in every language JSON format is the same. So you can get the JSON format, and by using a kind of function inside of the language, you can then convert it into an object and be able to read from the object itself instead of that specific language. So for example, in Python, read from JSON, and then we can get the data of different parts of the arrays or different objects. And this is also true about JavaScript. So we read from, we get the variable related to JSON format, we get the JSON data, and then we parse the actually the expression that we use for getting the data from a string to the kind of data that we can read from in JavaScript is called parsing JSON. So when we parse a JSON, we actually convert the type of JSON into a JavaScript readable format. So let's get into detail and see what it actually is, because what I said right now, you might have still no idea what a JSON is and how to get to use it inside of JavaScript. So I'm gonna create a new file, and I'm gonna call this JavaScript, actually JSON.js, and then I can also create a new file for HTML. So I think copy and paste file and rename it to JSON.html for now, and probably we don't need a second tag. And here you can change this to result. Let's see the result. Okay, there we go. And here should also change to JSON.js. Okay, there we go. And so let's get started. JSON.js, let's have them close to each other. Okay, right now, so we want to start with the simplest kind of JSON data. And by the way, a JSON data is written just the same as creating the objects when we write the objects, but with a small differences, and that the small difference is that we put it inside of a string. So I can write let JSON data. By the way, the variable can have any other kind of name. So JSON data, and then I can write apostrophe, and inside of the apostrophe I can write the name. For example, I can write name, and then we have colon, and then apostrophe, and then inside of the apostrophe you can write, for example, a name like Jim or Jimmy. And it should also be placed inside of the curly brackets. So there we go, and here we have no error. So let's console log this one and see the JSON data. So now let's get into our browser. This is the previous one. So let's open the one related to JSON. It should be right around here, HTML. Okay, and should get into inspect elements. And as you can see, it's an object and the name is Jimmy, so it's an object. Okay, we've defined it, and it's the simplest JSON object that we can have in JavaScript. Also, we can add other items. So for example, I can write other items just the way we've done before. So this one was first name, last name can be something else, then colon, then Jimmy Armitage, for example. And notice that this one is still just an object inside JavaScript, but if you add apostrophe over it, then let's see what it becomes. So okay, let me just make a change over here. Okay, now let's create an array, and then I will explain how to convert it into a kind of a text that then becomes a JSON. So let's define by using let JSON array or object, or I can write my array for now, my array, and then I can write here this way. So I can write employees. Let me write it inside apostrophes, employees, and then colon, and then we want to have different items of the employees. So let's open a square bracket. So arrays in JSON is written inside of the square bracket. There we go. So here I want to write the first names and last names of each one of the employees. So first of all, for example, I can write name. Let me copy this one, copy and paste it here. Over here, comma, and then another one. Let's add 3 to this. Okay, and then, for example, the second one could be Karen. And for example, Carrie is her last name. And so the last one, I have no idea, give me some ideas. For example, Mike Robertson. Now let's talk about our JSON objects. Here, let me just, first of all, before just converting it into a JSON format, because right here is just an object. So first of all, let's convert this one into JSON. So as you can see here, because here we use apostrophe, we use quotation mark, or if we had used quotation mark, then we use apostrophe in order not to mix up these two together. So let's save this, and let me also comment this part. There we go. So now let's refresh the page. And as you can see, it's different. It's not an object anymore. It's JSON, and it's printed out as a JSON right here. So it's pretty much different from the kind of format that we used to see. It was an object. Right now, it's a JSON. So let us try also type of. And so I can say actually type of JSON data. Okay, and save this. As you can see, it's a string, not an object, because we've put quotation marks over it, and it would show us in the format of JSON. So every JSON is a kind of a string, and JSON itself is not a kind of a data type, but rather it's a string, but it is in the format of JSON. So this kind of a string is in the format of JSON, so we can then use parse JSON, and then we can convert it into an object. So let me just parse this JSON. So now I can write const object, const, for example, my object, and then I can write JSON dot parse, and then instead of the parentheses we can write JSON data. So now I can console log my object. So let's see how these two are represented inside of our console. So now I fixed the problem, and the problem was that here around our object we need to have apostrophe, not quotation mark, and instead here we should have quotation mark. This is the actual JSON format. So instead of quotation mark for example name here or Jimmy here, if you write apostrophe instead of quotation marks, then it's not a JSON format. Anyway, but because it's a string, our console would represent that, but when you use JSON.parse, it will throw an error. So here I save my code and refresh the page, and as you can see here we have no error. As you can see, we have our own JSON format in string type, and then we have our object, which is the result of parsing the JSON, which was in the type of string. Now its type is object, not a string anymore. And as you can see, we can open it up and see last name and name. There we go. And here, as you can see, it's an object. Okay, so there we go. We have everything here. As you can see, the type is object, but we tried also this one and it was a string. So again, let us see their type, right? Console.log type of JSON data, and let's do this for my object. Save the code and refresh the page. And as you can see, the first one is string, the second one is an object. This way we'll be able to access all of the data inside of the parsed JSON, but when it is in the format of a string or JSON, then we will not be able to, for example, see the name of a certain employee. So we need to parse it into a JavaScript readable format or an object, so that we'll be able to, for example, access the name of the employee here. So now let's get back to our code and continue with the array in JavaScript. So here this is an object, right? But we want to have it in the format of JSON, so that later, for example, we can store it somewhere inside of a JSON file. So we generally convert it into JSON. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, when you convert it into a JSON format, then any kind of language will be able to read it because it's a string. So for example, then in Python you can read it and get benefit from the data inside of your JavaScript. So this is just a kind of a bridge or connection between different languages. It's a kind of data stored in a string, and then you can wrap it inside of a string and then open it up inside of your specific language. For example, in JavaScript we use parse, and as you can see we use parse, JSON.parse, in order to get the object from this string, and JavaScript did it automatically for us. So here, imagine that I want to also convert this into a JSON format. So I use apostrophe around it, then I use plus. It's just the same way we tackle the strings. Okay, something seems to be going wrong. Now here I use apostrophe, apostrophe, and apostrophe over here, and I could have this and here in this line. So okay, let me just let this go and add an apostrophe here, and we need to have plus between each one of the lines, or you can have it written inside a unique line, but this way it is better readable for anyone who reads your code. So now we have the array and it's in the format of JSON, so you want to parse it into JavaScript. So we have const and my array in JS. For example, this is our variable, and then I can write JSON dot parse, and inside of the parentheses I can write my array. There we go. So let us console.log my array in JS and see if it has been converted into the kind of format that we want, which is an object. So let's refresh the page. It seems to be an error, unexpected token, and here we seem to have something wrong about a square bracket. Okay, I think you do not need this come over here. So let's save the code and now refresh the page. As you can see, the problem is solved and we have the array as well. As you can see, if I open it up, you will be able to see everything. So you can see Jimmy, Armitage, and Carrie, Mike Robertson. So, and it shows the length and it shows the type is object. Perfect. So let us also see how it shows the array itself in a string. So let me change this into, I can use in VS Code, I can use change all occurrences, and I can write my array in a string, and both of them change accordingly. So let's save this, and something seems to have changed here. So my array in JS, but this one didn't change here, not sure why. Okay, my array in a string and my array in a string, my array in JS. Okay, so let's do it for my array in a string. So let's save this code, and by refreshing the page in Google Chrome, you will first be able to see the JSON, which you don't need to open because it's a string, right? So because it's a string, you will be able to see the entire JSON itself, whether it's a large one or a small one like this, or even larger, just more than even a page. But this one is an object, and as you can see, it opens up this way. You will be able to access different items inside of this array object. And there we go. So that's it for this tutorial about the JSON. And so we also have a stringify function. So let me also explain that. So imagine that you have an object that you want to stringify. So it's the opposite to parsing a JSON. So you can write JSON, you can write, okay, let's do it together. Const, for example, a stringified object which is equals to JSON dot stringify, and then we can use this parsed JSON here. And let us see how this one works. Let's just console.log stringified object and see how actually this one works and how it will represent it in console. So I've saved the code and refreshed the page, and as you can see, it's exactly the same as the very first file that we had here, right? So it's exactly the same. So I can say that a stringified object is exactly the same as my array in a string. So if here I write console.log, and then we want to write some Boolean expression, we want to see if my array in a string equals to a stringified object, right? So let's see if that is true. I will save the code and refresh the page. So here it says false. Probably some problem is some kind of small differences between these two. But generally, if you look at the whole format, you will see that there's not much difference. For example, this one doesn't go to the next line. It goes to the next line from here, from last name Carrie, but this one goes to the next line from name Karen, right? So not a very big difference, but they're generally the same. So they're not exactly the same because strings are very much sensitive to these kinds of differences. But generally, if you parse both of them, they will contain the same data. Okay. So let me parse this string here, a stringified object. You will again see that. So let me console.log JSON dot parse, and then here I can write stringified object, save the code, and here get into here. As you can see, we have the very same thing as here, the employees array. So as you can see, the data are also the same. As you can see, everything is the same: the length, the data, the elements of the array, and so on. And as you can see, we've done the process over and over again. The whole cycle is being repeated. First of all, we created the string itself, then we converted it into an object using the parse, and then we stringified it, and then we parsed it. And this is just a cycle, and it will repeat, and it will give you the very same results. Okay, that's it for this tutorial for JSON in JavaScript.